I want to thank Michelle Velasquez for coming out today. Michelle, I want to thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you fell into relocation?
Yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. So I'm with Preferred Corporate Housing, and I started with them a little over 9 years ago. I literally fell into this industry. I was working for a retailer, and I managed a bunch of people for a retailer, and I had a friend that was working in the industry, and she told me about the company, and I applied for a position as an assistant and got that position and then worked my way up through the company.
Great. So what's been your most rewarding part of your job?
So there's a lot of moving parts with this industry, and I love the fact that every day is a little different, but at the end of the day, you're still ultimately helping somebody, making their lives, their future life better, just by making sure that you're doing your part in the process.
Now, you mentioned a lot of important things. It sounds like you guys really focus on the little things, and those little things add up to something big. So that's great. So something that's come up in relocation is business travel. And when I hear business travel, I think of, let me book with my travel agent. Do I go online with TripAdvisor? What is business travel, and why is it relevant to relocation?
So it's a really interesting topic that is getting a lot of buzz right now. And I'm hearing a lot of corporate travel managers, relo managers, all having this conversation about their business travelers. I think the ultimate driver is cost containment, but also some other things that we could talk about is risk mitigation. I think that's a big driver of why business travel is now starting to become part of the relocation conversation. It's very interesting too, because this industry kind of, I always see a pendulum shifting back and forth. And a couple of years ago, when everything was great in the economy and people had a lot of money to spend, business travel was its own segment and Relo was its own segment, and those managers kind of managed each part independently. Well, now that we're getting a little tighter with our spend and things like that, I think that corporations are realizing that combining those two things can help with the cost containment, but also they've realized that relocation has done a really good job of the risk mitigation factors. When they're dealing with international destinations and things like that, they already have the shells in place and those processes in place, and then taking those processes and applying them to business travel just makes sense. The other side of it is, unfortunately, a lot of people within either the relocation space or the travel space at corporations, those were easy people. When they're having to kind of shed employees, sometimes relo and travel get caught up in that mix. And so then you've got maybe a travel manager that was laid off. And so now you've got a relocation manager, and they're like, oh, let's just have the relo manager manage travel.
Right.
I think that's happening a little bit, or vice versa. That happens the other way too, where that maybe the mobility manager is the one, or somebody in the mobility team gets laid off, and they shuffle that over to travel. I think on the relo side, relo's been asking for a seat at the travel table for a while, mainly because of some of the risks that are involved. We talked a little bit about tax implications,
right,
things like that could really cause problems for companies if they're not paying attention to where their employees are, how long they're in locations, and especially when you're talking about international destinations.
No, that's really critical. I'm glad you mentioned that. The tax implication, not knowing where your workforce is, really, really important things that employers need to consider. What other trends are you seeing in business travel? Is it, for example, like how long are you seeing travelers out there? And
well, that's an interesting question, because usually business travel was anything less than 30 days would sometimes get kind of cycled over to that business travel space. Some companies I've seen, anything that doesn't involve a full relocation, anything where they're not giving relocation benefits, fell under the travel space. But now, just like what we talked about with those implications where, some countries have restrictions on how long a worker can be in a company before they, apply for certain visas and things like that in order to be compliant, like we talked about the tax implications. So I think that's what's driving, the business travel sector to merge a little bit more with relo. So business travel, honestly, could be anything. It could be a short-term assignment. It could be, there's all kinds of things that could be involved with the business travel. It typically just involves anything where their personal belongings are not being relocated as well.
Okay.
So, I see a lot of trends as far as, I think what's standard in the industry is hotel bookings, things like that. But I think as the relocation and travel departments kind of merge, once again, relocation's kind of figured some of these things out, and that's, where my company comes in. We offer fully furnished apartments in lieu of hotel stays. So, if you've got a location where you're going to be there for a significant amount of time, which is basically anything more than 30 days, it's more cost effective to stay in a fully furnished apartment than it is to stay in a hotel. There's lots of things to consider there, like meals, being able to prepare your own meals as opposed to having a per diem where you have to pay your employee because they're eating out every night and you're giving them a $40 per meal budget or whatever it might be. With the corporate apartment, those budgets can be significantly reduced or eliminated altogether because they do have the ability to prepare their own meals in a full-size kitchen. You look at things like hotels are often in transient locations. You've got your neighbors on either side checking in, checking out each day. So if you're somebody that's in a location for a month or 2 months at a time, that gets really old, you know, and you want to be in a more residential neighborhood. You want to be able to take advantage of things that those residential neighborhoods have to offer, conveniences that sometimes hotels don't have. So those are just some of the things that the employee, the traveler themselves, that they really value and appreciate. So no,
it makes sense. Absolutely. Even having something as convenient as a grocery store, to go
Absolutely.
to. So, great. Now, what are some of the challenges of servicing business travelers? I would imagine timing is really, really crucial. Like, what are the challenges and what are you doing to service them?
Yeah, so the challenge with business travelers that I'm seeing and that I'm hearing from some of the HR managers, travel manager, or mobility managers that we interact with is that business travelers themselves are used to doing a lot of things on their own. They're used to, I've got a trip, I'm going to go ahead and book this flight and turn in my receipts to my travel manager or, go through my portal on this travel. They're used to kind of managing their own processes. And the problem with that comes back to those risks that we talked about. Right. When they're doing things on their own, are they utilizing the preferred suppliers? Are they taking advantage of cost savings that you can get for benefits of combining all of your spend into one provider or very strategic partners? Right. Are they letting their manager know when they're leaving the country and how long they're staying in those locations? So I think that's the biggest challenge that Relo, if we're going to have a seat at that table, that those managers really have to get a grasp on is, where are my employees? Knowing where they are at all times. And that seems to be what everyone's talking about is, how can we better track these business travelers? How can we keep tabs on how long they're in certain locations? How can we make sure that they understand what the implications are? So when they are going off on their own and not telling anybody, they know that they have to follow the proper procedures in order to do things like that.
No, that's fantastic. That's really good point. What I'm hearing too is a lot of people concerned about the new administration and what that means to immigration, Brexit. This stuff may or may not apply to business travelers. What is your take on that and how it impacts the industry?
So, from my standpoint in corporate housing, we only deal with a little piece of that. And I think the implications for us that we're seeing right now is a little bit of panic. And so, and what I mean by that is, everyone's asking a lot of questions and nobody seems to have a lot of answers. So what that's creating is, everybody kind of is digging their heels in a little bit and trying to make sure they've got the plan in place. But the problem is you can't make a plan if you don't really know what the end goal is. You don't really know what the end goal is because you don't know what restrictions are going to be put on what. So we're seeing a lot of, people last minute saying, I need to come here, I need to go there, or we are seeing some denials that's been happening recently where people are trying to enter the country and they're not able to. I think everything's kind of getting blamed on, the administration and some of the changes that are happening. I don't really know if those changes have exactly. I don't know if those changes have really taken full effect to where those are the root causes of the issues, but that's kind of what we're seeing is right now. There's lots of people asking questions, not a lot of answers, unfortunately.
Okay, no, that's fair. And what would the three major things that an employer developing a business travel policy, or maybe it's the mobility manager considering it? What are three things that they should really consider most in developing this policy?
So my take on that, advice that I would give is collaboration is key. I think if you have companies that are doing this really well, where they're integrating Relo and travel together, don't reinvent that wheel. Just copy that wheel and tailor it to what you need it to be for your program. I also think, learning from each department, I think because there has been such a divide in those departments in the past, they're not used to communicating and sharing data. I think that's the biggest thing, that data share is super important. I think relo managers are getting a good grasp on that data. They're utilizing providers that are getting data in front of them, and now they need to work with travel departments and show them that data and show them how to integrate that data and work together.
Collaboration is key. That's
absolutely
great. And the data too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the data share, collaboration, and then don't reinvent the wheel. Just copy it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
Those are the three that I would come up with.
Well, to be honest with you. Well, I want to thank again Michelle Velasquez for coming out and participating in our podcast. Michelle, you have a great conference. It was great seeing you, and hope you have a great year.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.